Welcome back to Mik'd Up. We're brought to you by Sterling Automotive. I kind of teased it before we went into break. Jesus, Lloyd, you are. Let's take a little time out there. Let me finish. Yeah, thank you. We're talking a little bit of Pels. I mentioned how impressive they looked this weekend. They obviously swept 2 games. I say swept. It wasn't a series, but basically felt like a series. They swept the 2 games against the Suns. They're now sole possession of first place in the Western Conference. Jake Madison, host of Locked On Pels podcast, knows a whole hell of a lot more than I do about the New Orleans Pelicans. Jake, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Of course. Thanks for having me on to talk some hoops.
Oh, man, I love hoops. Obviously, football season starting to wind down. There's 2 teams in New Orleans. The other team stinks right now, so I'm really happy that the Pelicans have kind of lived up to expectations. And that kind of leads me into my first question, right? They come into the season with super high expectations based off the way they finished last season. Do you feel like that they've met those expectations or exceeded those expectations?
It's got to be exceeded, right? You're looking at a team that's first place in the Western Conference, and to go from the play-in tournament, a team that only won 36 games, had a sub-500 record, to that in this period of time, I think is incredibly impressive. And it's the way they're doing it. They're top 5 in offense, they're top 5 in defense. Right now, they're the only team in the league that meets both of those 2 criteria. You figured adding Zion back to this roster was going to lead to some very good things, and he's playing like an MVP candidate right now. But the West looked to be a little bit closer than we thought it might. Getting to the 4th seed would have been a big accomplishment for New Orleans, but simply avoiding the play-in tournament would have been one too. So to be first in the West, we expected this team to be good. I didn't expect it to be this good this quickly just yet.
Now, so I love that you said that, Jake. If we're sitting here talking about this team and we're looking at them, and you would say they kind of overperformed to this point. We're a little past 25 games into the season. And I personally feel like you still don't hear really like national hype on them yet. What's the buzz around the building, and do you feel that kind of matches what your perception of what's going on media-wise outside of New Orleans, I guess?
Yeah, look, this is not one of the sexy big-name teams in the NBA. No small markets are. Without getting into a ton of stuff with it, right, there's definitely some bias against small markets. This is a team that less than a year ago, people were saying they should move it to Seattle. They should move it to another city. New Orleans doesn't deserve a team. And all of that's just talking to try and make headlines and things like that. And if you were paying attention to what they were doing here in New Orleans, winning games, really turning it around with that trade for CJ McCollum after the deadline last year, you could see kind of the seeds being planted, the base being started of what should be a really good team. And now they're reaching that level, and they're doing it in such an emphatic way with that Zion 360 windmill dunk at the end of the Suns game on Friday that was incredibly disrespectful in the most fun way. You can't avoid this team anymore. Zion's going to be in the MVP conversation now. They have to talk about them. But locals here, in New Orleans, and I think in the Gulf South region in general, know how special this team is. They know how fun this team is. They know that this is a really easy group of guys to root for. So with being in the building, the past couple of games, it's felt like a playoff atmosphere. The fans know the stakes of what these 2 games against the Phoenix Suns were. They know that that's kind of becoming the Pelicans' rival right now. They know that New Orleans was first place in the Western Conference. You couldn't get tickets for less than $200 the other night, which is incredibly impressive for New Orleans. So locally, people really know what's going on with this team. They're paying attention. It's kind of the biggest thing. You see a lot of Pels gear around the city right now. I was just at lunch with a lot of the sports media today for a holiday luncheon, and all they wanted to do, including the Saints people, was talk about the Pelicans. The national media will catch up to that eventually.
You talked about the Suns and Pels rivalry. Kind of started last year in the playoffs, and they obviously had 2 heated games this weekend. Both were very good games. Pelicans won both of them. How cool is that? It feels like a real rivalry, right? Like you have a team they're from completely different parts of the country, but it just feels like...
Well, there's one thing that tethers them together.
Right. Obviously, Chris Paul and a lot of the connections.
I was going to say the Kardashians.
Okay, well, but it feels like it's a real rivalry. How much fun has that been to watch unfold? And what was the energy like this weekend, especially after the Zion dunk and all of the extracurriculars that happened after that?
It really does feel like a rivalry. And you mentioned there's the Chris Paul connection. There's the connection between the two head coaches in Monty Williams, who's the former New Orleans head coach. You got Willie Green, who was just the leader there in Phoenix too. And then you have, it's been built off of that playoff series, right? Chris Paul and Jose Alvarado going at it in this game. In that series, Chris Paul taking cheap shots when he could, Jose being hurt for these 2 games, and Chris Paul trying to get some shots in to the point where Jose Alvarado refused to say his name in a post-game press conference and just referred to him as that guy. You had Zion Williamson putting the exclamation point with that dunk that he did at the end of the game. These two teams have a little bit of bad blood, and I think you don't see that enough in professional sports. And it's kind of, in a sense, refreshing to see that these two teams really want to beat each other. They get up for these games, right? A game in December in the NBA over an 82-game regular season doesn't truly matter, right? The stakes are never going to be that high, but it had a playoff level intensity on Friday night with how close that game was, punctuated by that dunk at the end. And then Sunday, the crowd was ready for it. You could hear it. The boos for Chris Paul coming through your TV, right? They were ready for the Suns team to try and influence that game in any way that they could. And trust me, when Chris Paul was fouled out of the game on a flop call that had to be reversed, which is just the most ironic thing that you could imagine. The crowd let him hear it. And to have that kind of atmosphere, to see New Orleans and this region in general, right, be ready for a December 11th game, that's never really been the case before. So people, again, know what's going on with this team. They're ready for this team to kind of arrive on the national stage, and you're starting to see it. When Zion drops 70 points on 70% shooting, which is an absurd number, people are going to take note of that, and the city certainly has. And it's fun to have a team that you're likely going to have to face in the postseason again. You got one more game against them this coming Sunday. It's fun to have a rivalry like that between two young, good teams, I think.
So, I mean, you talk about this team and how they're playing right now. I want to know with how Zion's playing, with how young this team is, because let's be honest, there's no real bona fide superstars on the team yet. We know what Zion's name has been, but we also know how much he hasn't been on the court. With this team being so kind of new together and all these guys being so young, talk about Zion taking on somewhat of a leadership role and how well this team has gelled together with seemingly everyone kind of playing a role and being very comfortable in their role already this early. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you hit on 2 key things there, right? Zion is becoming a superstar before our eyes right now. And it's maybe a bit of a blessing in disguise that Brandon Ingram has been out the past 7 games, right? They're riding a 7-game winning streak and their second best player hasn't been playing whatsoever. They're also down another starter in Herb Jones. But it's forced Zion to really kind of take on this starring role. We saw glimpses of point Zion under Stan Van Gundy, but now they're unleashing that fully. You're seeing a guy who's 6'6", 280 pounds play point guard, and no one is able to stop him whatsoever. And when they get him the ball at the top of that 3-point line, let him survey the court, either drive down or dish out to someone else. But the way the court gravity he has, he's just influencing games on such an impactful level. And if you looked at these 2 Suns games, when the Pelicans were in the half court, if Zion had the ball on one side, all 5 defenders were on that half of the court. If you just split the court right down the middle, all 5 Suns defenders were over there trying to do anything they could to stop Zion. And it didn't work, and this is why he was just named the NBA's Player of the Week. So he's really kind of shed a lot of the baggage that he's had. You're kind of seeing Zion 2.0 is the way I've been describing it, in a sense, that he's willing to really step up and be this leader on the team and try and put the games that he's missed, the times when maybe he was checked out from this team in the past. And then what you've also seen this season is the Pelicans' depth shining through. Brandon Ingram not playing, Herb Jones not playing. You've seen CJ McCollum struggle this season and miss a number of games. Zion and Brandon Ingram have only played 11 games together this season, and they're still finding ways to go out and win because it's truly a next man up mentality. You have guys like Najee Marshall, an undrafted player, stepping up, being huge during this winning streak. You saw Jose Alvarado almost go for 40 the other night. It's just guys that are ready to go when their number is called, but that also work really well with the Pelicans superstar here in Zion. Najee works because he's making his threes and he's just kind of a bulldog on defense. You have Jose Alvarado to help him get set up in the half court and add some 3-point shooting as well. So all the role role players just work, they fit, and the chemistry is there with Zion because he makes their life so much easier when 3, 4 guys, 5 guys at times are trying to defend him. Everyone else has space to work, and they're stepping up into those roles admirably, and it's why you could argue that the Pelicans are the deepest team in the league right now.
You talked about Zion and how good he's been, obviously not having the superstars around him consistently, right? And you talked about the leadership role and all of those things. When is Ingram expected back, 1? And 2, when he comes back, how is the chemistry? How are they going to be able to gel together? Because there's only one ball. Obviously, there's 5 guys on the court. You have 2 guys who kind of play similar types of games. Ingram's not going to shoot a ton of threes. He can, but he's more of a mid-range, get into the paint type of guy. How are they going to be able to mesh the offense and be able to have the same type of continuity when Ingram comes back?
It's a really good question. You know, when they've played together, so they've played 12 games together, they're 7-5. So it's still a winning record, but that's a far cry from where the Pelicans are right now at 10 games above 500. So I think it's still a bit of an open question of how do you find the right rhythm and flow to this offense to get both guys theirs, keep them happy, and still win basketball games. I think you still need to go with point Zion. It just works so much better. They did a lot of post-ups with him early on in the season, particularly on the right side, so that he could go to his left, try and score with his favored left hand. But it really only leaves him about a third of the court to work in. It neutralizes just the best aspects of his game, which is the scoring at the rim. He has more options and ability to score coming downhill from the top of the three-point line. You cut off passing options for him by posting him up to let him pass, let him create for others. They've got to still go with that because at times when they don't do that, we've seen this Pelicans offense really struggle to get some points. It's why they almost didn't beat a team like the Detroit Pistons earlier on this week when that team only has 7 wins. They lost to the Indiana Pacers, who aren't particularly good either because of that. You want to avoid dropping those games. It's got to be point Zion. And that means getting Brandon Ingram into more of an off-ball role. And I think just kind of talking with him, Willie Green has done a really good job of getting through to these players, getting their buy-in, and saying, look, you're going to be able to score tons. You're going to have so much more space to score in any way that you want. When Zion has the ball in his hands and he's drawing 2-3 defenders just with the idea that he might touch the ball. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing, is kind of getting him to understand that his role is going to shift a little bit. Look, he wants to be the starting guy too. He wants to have the ball in his hands and create for others. He's going to be able to do that still. It's just going to hopefully come after Zion has kind of started the initial action in the offense for this team. As for when we're going to see him return, I believe he's listed as out still for this first game against Utah on Tuesday night. Hopefully we'll see him Thursday. If not, I would imagine Sunday against the Phoenix Suns on the road. But he's pretty close to be coming back. But what we've seen from him is he's a guy that's at his best when he's 100% healthy. We've seen him rush back from injuries. He dealt with a big hip injury last year and just wasn't his effective self. And at times was maybe hurting the team out there on the court. So that's a big part of the reason why you're not seeing him out there just yet when he probably could play if it was a playoff game. But given the position the team's in, given the depth they have, there's no need to rush him back just yet. Still, I think we're going to see him back sooner rather than later.
Just needs a good soak in Utah.
Okay. Oh, you talked about depth. You talked about role players. I think if you're just a casual NBA fan, you're looking at the Pels roster, and you go down, you're like, man, what kind of depth is he talking about? It seems like there's a lot of guys that have very key roles on this team that a lot of people outside of New Orleans don't really know, right? Obviously, Jose Alvarado has done his thing. He's kind of made his name in the postseason as a pesky defender. Herb Jones did his thing last year as a defender, but he was a second rounder. You have a lot of guys that you look on the court and you're like, damn, these guys are committed to whatever role they have. How impressive is that, and how rare is that for a team in the NBA to have so many young role players that understand where they're at and love kind of the role that they're in?
Yeah, look, it's really important for this Pelicans team. This is a small market team. We do not know for sure if they will ever pay the luxury tax, and that means in the future you're going to lose players. So if you have another guy ready to go that's on a cheap rookie cost-controlled contract, that can create a lot of sustainability, which is vitally important in a small market like this. So these guys being ready to go and playing at a high level right now help you immediately, and they're also going to help you for the future. You mentioned some of them, but you look at these guys that are just kind of willing to sacrifice and do whatever it takes to win. Last year when Najee Marshall was on the court, he wanted to be the guy. He wanted to go out and try and score 30. He's not that good, right? When you look at some of these role players for this team, they're not starters. I think Trey Murphy would start on a lot of teams. Larry Nance Jr. would be a borderline starter for a lot of teams, but Najee, Jose, Dyson Daniels, who's been really good, and I'll get to in a second, none of those guys are starters here, but at times they're able to fill in and play that role. And that just speaks to how good Zion Williamson is and how well his game translates to elevating those around him. But to have that buy-in from a guy like Najee Marshall, who's like, okay, I know what my role is here. I'm going to sacrifice to do what I can do to help this team win. I think says a lot about the culture that they built in New Orleans. It says a lot about Willie Green being able to get through to these guys. You have Devontae Graham, who's having his best season so far that he's had in the past couple of years. Struggled last year. You're seeing him come off the bench after being a starter for the majority of last season. He's bought into that role as that shooter off the bench. He's playing more on defense than we've ever seen from him before. This is going to go back to the head coach and how good Willie Green has done here in New Orleans, being able to kind of take this team that underperformed to start last year and see the gradual improvement for it. And it's really paying off for them this season with all of these guys ready to go. You even have a rookie in Dyson Daniels, the 8th overall pick. Rookies don't usually contribute at the NBA level on defense for the first 2-3 years in the league. Here he is, less than 30 games into his career. He's locked up LeBron James. He's locked up Luka Doncic, and he was putting the clamps on Chris Paul the other night as well.
I wanted to ask you a couple of things, 2 quick hitters real quick, just because of where the
Brace yourself.
No, these are normal questions. Normal
All
questions. Nobody's in trouble. When you see the Pelicans and you see the Suns, is it the best rivalry in the NBA that you see right now? And is that because of Chris Paul?
I think so. It's the one with the most bad blood, and these two teams really want to stick it to
Feels
each
like
other.
the Bad Boy
I just
Pistons.
love something about that, right? Yeah, like that's a good way to describe it. It's like the Bad Boy Pistons and say the Chicago Bulls, and the Bulls had to kind of grow up before they got through that team and play a physical style of basketball that they just weren't used to, and it kind of forced them to grow up and evolve. And you're seeing a little bit of that, I think, right here. I'm trying to think of like other rivalries that are kind of at that level, and it's just it hasn't been to this degree just yet, right? We don't have the Houston Rockets versus the Warriors anymore, so I don't think you can put some of those other ones in there. So this is like kind of the new best rivalry. Like all of these games going forward should be on national TV, you would think.
Well, no, and I would even say if you want to talk about like Warriors and Cavs, like it didn't have that much bad blood in terms of like these teams like they hate each other. Like Warriors and Cavs, they had to match up all the time and play against each other. You had the Draymond nut kick, and you saw LeBron kind of sun Stephen Curry. But this feels like legitimately we don't like each other. In the regular season, we're not even in Christmas yet.
No, and I think what helps is they're both in the Western Conference, right? Warriors-Cavs was what you saw in the finals, and it was just kind of the greatness of LeBron carrying that Cavs team pretty far. Here, only one of these teams can go to the finals. So the stakes are pretty high when they play every single time because it's going to influence postseason seeding, and if one team wants to make it, if these two teams play in the conference finals, it almost feels like there's more at stake for that than it would be if these two teams played in the NBA finals if they were in different conferences.
Jake, I appreciate you. One last question before I let you go, and it's probably going to be it's almost impossible to answer.
Oh,
but
good.
No, but it's based off of what you see right now, and based off of what you feel like they're going to be once everybody's healthy, everybody's playing together. Do you see the Pels as the favorites right now in the Western Conference to be that number 1 seed?
Ooh.
If you're putting me on the spot, I'd probably lean towards no this moment. It doesn't mean they can't be in the mix, right? I think you see a team like Memphis who's been there a little bit before New Orleans. I trust them a little bit more long term right now, and that's not a knock on the Pelicans. I just want to see Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson play a little bit more together before I come in and go, okay, this is all set. There's some things they need to figure out. When they show us that, and I have no doubt that they will, then I'm ready to elevate this team. The offense is legitimate. The defense is 3rd best in the league and reminds you of the Toronto Raptors from years past, and those are some of the best defensive teams we've seen recently. If they keep this together, look, they're a legit title contender now, and if things kind of stay as is, they're the 1 or 2 seed in the West. That's a good spot to be in.
I can't imagine what the NBA playoffs looks like in New Orleans. I cannot wait. I can't wait for that.
Well, they blew a 30-point lead against the Warriors.
Enough
in
over
game.
there, negative Nancy.
I mean, I was there.
Jake, I appreciate you for coming on. We'll definitely have you back on. You're awesome. thank God the Pels have given Louisiana, especially South Louisiana, something to cheer about because, New Orleans is going
Didn't come
through a
from
little.
the Saints this
The
year, I
Saints
can
are
tell
going
you
through
that.
a little bit, but that's okay.
Andy
okay.
Dalton is walking through
That's
that
okay.
door.
That's okay. Well, they'll figure it out. I have no doubt. Hopefully, Sean gives everybody a nice little gift at the end of the year. We'll see.
Oh, yeah. Do you know?
no,
Is Sean
he-
Payton coming back?
Trust me, no one knows that one
Yeah.
just yet.
Jake, I appreciate it, man. Have a great night. Thank you again for coming on. We'll definitely have you back. Appreciate you.
Thanks, everybody.